thanks for joining us today as a representative from Benevolent AI, Mark. Your title is SVP, Informatics and Data. Could you walk us through your key responsibilities and areas of influence within Benevolent AI?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. As mentioned, my name is Mark Davies. I am the SVP of Informatics and Data at Benevolent AI. And what I bring to Benevolent AI is a lot of experience around data integration and ensuring data is in a form that it can be utilized to support drug discovery activities. Specifically, I see one of my key responsibilities as ensuring that we have the right data within the organization that creates that foundation that enables drug discovery capabilities that our platform enables. When I think about the right data, I really sort of see this as a multi-parameter challenge, which requires a good understanding of its strengths of data, weaknesses and gaps across the multiple sources that we can utilize, but ultimately creating an integrated view that our users can actually then derive those impactful insights that allow us to actually progress our programs. Data itself, I would say, is arguably something that rarely ever comes in a ready-to-go plug-in form. And I work with my teams to develop the data models, the integration frameworks that help really streamline this integration process. And as a consequence, it really sort of speeds up that decision-making capabilities and what the teams are managing to achieve within our workflows. A key output from the area that I run is what we call the Benevolent Knowledge Graph. And this is this foundational view across all of the biomedical data that we have integrated that sits underneath our tools and really enables this search capabilities across all of this data and jumpstarts many of our programs.
Excellent. Thank you for providing that overview. Now, could you tell us a little bit about Benevolent AI's mission and how you got started?
Absolutely. So Benevolent aims to really better understand disease biology and develop more effective therapies for the millions of patients worldwide. But where we started, we're a much smaller organization than we are now. Originally really focused on bringing together network biology representations, biological views of structured data sources that support that initial investigation. And over the course of the last 6 to 7 years, we've grown from a group of 10 to 20 individuals to in excess of 300 people, building out a platform that supports this discovery activities and drug discovery capabilities that helps validate these hypotheses. From what this actually means from a platform and a data side, we're actually really bringing together information from the scientific literature, from the tens of millions of papers that are published and regularly sort of created on a yearly basis, from hundreds and thousands of different data sets being created from omics and personalized data, as well as experimental findings, either we're creating ourselves or bringing in from partners. And these interrelationships that we're actually being able to represent and the biological concepts that we're defining underpin the information that we're sharing. This really supports the enhancement and development of the machine learning algorithms, as well as just the analysis that actually allows the teams to make the decisions and understanding within the disease context.
Excellent. You spoke a little bit about machine learning algorithms, so that segues very nicely into my next question. Benevolent AI applies AI machine learning to illuminate potential new drugs and ways to develop them. So BAI is a force to be reckoned with in this space. So could you tell us a little bit more about what your company does in the machine learning space and what makes you stand out amongst your competitors or other companies doing similar things, for instance?
One of the key learnings that we sort of see this regularly in the press is primary reasons for drugs to fail in the clinic is the wrong target has been selected from the outset. And really what this underpins is if the hypothesis is flawed or incorrect to begin with, later stage failures are essentially inevitable. And as a consequence, what we're really trying to achieve is develop this hypothesis-driven approach. It's when we think about when we're initiating a particular disease deployment, when we want to understand, when a biological system gets dysregulated or goes wrong, what are the key bits of information our teams and researchers need to have at their hands? And what is that hypothesis that ultimately leads to that target that we believe is something that we want to prosecute further and understand if we design a molecule or some sort of intervention at a later stage, we will have a therapeutic positive impact on that patient group. For us, as I mentioned, we develop we identify disease areas of interest. We run something what we call essentially our deployment processes, which is really focused on initially posing a biological question. What is that biological mechanism that we believe is central to that disease area of interest? What is the information that we have at the fingertips within our knowledge graph that can help better understand? And ultimately, providing that allows us to initiate initial target identification work and then latter validation through assays, which we are developing in our labs in Cambridge or through CROs that we're working with to help rapidly validate that hypothesis from the start. The platform augments the scientific discovery process. And a key differentiator which we see is we've built this with our users, the individuals working at Benevolent for them. It's been very much a co-designer process. Again, identifying what we need to build, work with the teams that are utilizing it, and then rapidly evolving the platform, the technology to support the specific requirements at that early stage, so that we start off our discovery process with the right hypothesis and validate it as rapidly as possible.
With that context as a foundation for our discussion today, we are particularly interested in hearing a little bit about the ways in which BAI engages with the scientific data. To get us started, what are the key technologies and critical data sources that help you do what you do?
So there's a number of different elements to this, and one of the key areas or key technologies that we have developed is around actually initial data integration. For us, maybe arguably some of the less glamorous sides of it, but it's arguably one of the most critical technologies. It allows us to bring together and integrate data coming from the extraction of scientific literature data, omics, from sort of chemistry experimental data as well. And again, how we sort of harmonize and normalize that and ensure that appropriate quality checks are being carried out on this journey and through to ultimate delivery to our users is a key thing. Thinking very specifically around how we leverage information coming from scientific literature and from the journals, of course, of Nature. There's maybe sort of two broad machine learning approaches which have a very big impact, and how I'd probably like to categorize into two areas. The first is around information completion, the other is around hypothesis prediction. And when we think about information completion, this is really making sure we have access to all of that written scientific literature and all of that data in a format that is readily queryable. So if we can extract the results, the outcomes which have been sort of captured within the results of the publications, and make sure that is available within our knowledge graph in an understandable, queryable way, that is a big success. But it also ensures that we have that complete view when we think of literature. This underpins the ethos of our NLP capabilities, where we're building out that initial entity recognition, that mapping in where we identify entities, mapping those to key objects within ontologies and bespoke representations we have built at Benevolent. And then finally, that layer of relationship extraction, connecting these objects together and creating that established concrete view of what is actually happening. With this basis of information completion combined with other structured data resources and experimental data, we can really then think about that prediction phase. And having all of that, again, that's sort of all the fingertips at our fingertips, our drug discoverers, all of that data, and as well as our models that can then actually then inference and make predictions over this foundation. This is where target identification really sort of kicks in. And for us, we employ what we call our fleet of target prediction methodologies, which leverage graph completion, graph traversal, causal reasoning, as well as user-guided approaches that make inferences and suggestions to our teams around what would be a relevant target for a novel indication which we're exploring within the teams. And again, helping characterize elements of what makes that target right and the appropriate metadata is again what our tools enable our users. to understand.
Thank you. That's fascinating. You spoke a little bit about Springer Nature as one of the data providers. What attracted you to Springer Nature as a provider for TDM or text and data mining content in the first place? And over the years, could you talk a bit about the strength of the relationship with Springer Nature?
Yeah, so going back to almost product development basics, this also applies when we think about data, and we really treat data as a product within Benevolent. So when we think about going to our users, they want access to the best quality scientific literature, and that sets that expectation that we'll be working or wanting to ensure that we have access to the content Springer Nature create and publish. So that really sort of drives why we engage in the first place. But in terms of continuing and establishing that relationship, which started back in 2018, we've sort of rapidly recognized that you've put in place the right supporting technical and data delivery capabilities that allow us to easily work with your content, be able to process it. It flows neatly into our existing pipelines and allows us to sort of rapidly create that proprietary view that supports that discovery processes I was referring to earlier. So we've, over the course of the last four years, I think we've worked very well together in establishing that relationship and then being able to sort of grow that going forward as well.
It was interesting that you mentioned that you treat data as a product. So from a workflow point of view, what are the general steps that are taken to acquire and process data within Benevolent AI?
Yeah, we really do sort of treat data as a product coming in and often driven by what our users and the researchers, the teams within Benevolent. And to give a bit more context there, we work with the drug discoverers within the Benevolent AI organization as our key user group. That really drives that product development, what tools we're building, so that they ultimately benefit from the systems and actually rapidly progress the discovery process that they're working on. But where they highlight maybe a gap within our systems, we then look to identify what can potentially fill that, identify potential producers of data, generators, or ourselves being able to experimentally create that information ourselves. We then work where it is maybe an external party to start that engagement piece. And often the initial understanding of what is possible around data delivery, a key aspect for us is often around getting bulk access to information so that we can integrate at scale. But prior to any sort of deeper pieces, it would require that initial understanding of what can be achieved with the data, which will often need sample data to be shared so that we can test it within our pipelines and ensure it's meeting formats and quality expectations we would consider most important. Throughout the process, so once we have actually identified that this is something we'd like to bring in and actually leverage further, we will run through our integration pipelines, but also maybe consider some other important dimensions along the way. And this may be actually elements of where we feel will have maximal impact. Will there be a disease focus element to the data set? Will it be really being brought in to support a deployment we're undertaking, maybe in atopic dermatitis? Or will it be more agnostic and support all of our deployments? Will the data model that we have built or that really underpins our knowledge graph, will we need to make some adaptations to this? And what impact will that have? And again, we'll plan this as part of the product development process. Downstream of once the data is integrated, what tools, applications, machine learning models will be utilizing it? And again, some of these may be just ready to go, or we may need to actually plan how these maybe need to be modified or updated to better leverage the information we're bringing. We also think about, with all of these different dimensions and evaluations, this one thing I consider most important is this time to data impact. Once we have it, how long will it actually take to have a visible impact on a particular decision being made? And really trying to produce that as rapidly as possible so that we can ultimately leverage that data and get that return on investment as quickly as possible. Some other components as well is kind of really understanding the uniqueness of the data, where it provides a something novel, which is not available elsewhere, but also balancing that, because it's sometimes reassuring to see an element of overlap or redundancy with other resources. It's almost multiple voting or providing additional evidence that we have an association that can actually be used to support a target identification activity. These are sort of key dimensions that we think about when bringing in data as part of that process. Technically, we have a team within Benevolent, the knowledge delivery area, which I'm responsible for, which is a multi-functional team made up of engineers, informaticians, machine learning researchers, data science, and product, which really then focus on all of the technical components that bring this together, and capabilities such as from an NLP side, like name entity recognition, entity linking, relationship extraction, making sure that these are all sort of running when we're thinking about processing data coming from sort of Springer Nature directly. And again, these are how we thought about that process, how data gets processed and made available to our users. But once it's there, the job is naturally not done. We then track its usage and understand how the data is having impact. And that feedback actually then informs maybe future updates to the system. We may want to further adapt or improve a relationship extraction model as a consequence of understanding how the data is performing or affecting decisions being made by the team.
Great, thanks, Mark. Talking about those processes, what do you need from STM publishers to make this process as efficient as possible? I know you spoke a little bit about the data delivery mechanisms, but are there other aspects that would make this process even more efficient?
I think when we think about publishers and getting access to data, formats are one of those sort of key things, and ensuring that we maintain those standard formats, there's consistency across the industry. When it comes to open source access to this, as long as the publishers are also leveraging those consistent formats, that is a key thing. In terms of how we then further enrich the information that is housed within the scientific literature, and really that metadata, that annotations on top, making sure this is complete. And historically, where we see sort of mesh annotation of documents, I think there's more sophisticated ways we can think about applying what the publication and the results are about. I also think there's greater opportunities as well to look to go beyond maybe the scope of what is within the publication to begin with, and where we see the supplementary materials or experimental data, which is often associated with the publication in question, how we can improve access to that. And again, those standards where we think about formats and metadata and highlighting the visibility of this data, making sure that that is improved and still leading back to users like ourselves when we actually process the data. Continue to sort of encourage that quality aspect as well. And I don't think Springer Nature have too much trouble in attracting the highest quality scientific talent to publish, but maintaining that is something is critical. And again, from our side, we want access to the output from the best labs, the best researchers going into our knowledge foundation as well. And I think over the last couple of years, and I know sort of Springer Nature have also been very proactive in this space, but promoting and embracing open access publishing as well. I think that is a very important aspect. And we've seen this very recently within the CORD-19 resource created as a consequence of the COVID-19 sort of pandemic, bringing together access to data, reducing maybe any of the barriers around it, so that researchers, commercial, academic can access, I think, is a key thing as well to keep promoting.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. We've spoken a little bit about what works well within the system, but what do you consider the key challenges for the work that you do within Benevolent AI?
I think there's probably, again, a number of dimensions to challenges. And one of the key ones is, I think, actually around underlying data access itself. It is becoming, I guess, increasingly challenging to identify novel data that will really provide a a step up or a real sort of game-changing element to process, and it's how either we can think about working with data partners to create that or generate it ourselves. There's also additional challenges around, obviously, some costs and elements around licensing as well of these pieces, and how we again work with providers to make sure that we can bring data and leverage it in the way that it works for us and obviously the provider in question. I think there's challenges which have been around since the beginning, really, and this is on standardization. So unfortunately, biomedical data is not consistently standardized in sort of common formats. Fantastic efforts are underway, and in the pre-competitive space, and we see more and more adoption of fair data principles, but there's still a journey to go on there. And I think this is one of the challenges we take on internally at Benevolent, but I think there's more to be done with all of the providers and producers out there. Limited data is another big challenge, and we often, sort of touching a little bit back to that access point, where we do have data, it's maybe not enough to actually maybe make that predictive model within the chemistry space, or sort of have that complete view. As a consequence, we actually proactively embraced this and built a team that actually tackles this head on, and this is our Learning from Limited Data team within Benevolent. And again, these are sort of really trying to understand where there is a limited sort of data asset, how we can maximize its value, leveraging state-of-the-art ML approaches, and ultimately seeing how that can actually feed into an application we're developing within our product. In Benevolent, we also find a mix of a couple of worlds. So we're bringing together the expertise of big pharma as well as large tech. And again, this can sometimes create challenges just around common language and how shared experiences and technical capabilities can actually be brought together to really sort of deliver what it is we're trying to achieve at Benevolent. And when we think about just even sort of funny things around the acronyms like API can mean very different things to individuals coming from different areas. But even just how we go about sort of delivering and those timeline expectations, making sure that we are moving in the same direction and understanding what life cycles take in drug discovery versus sometimes some of the tech cycles. And underpinning this, we are a technology company developing ML AI approaches. The innovation life cycle is moving very fast, and understanding what approaches, what models, learning models will scale in real world applications can be challenging. And again, we look to identify what we think will have maximum impact. We've developed internal frameworks to really kind of highlight and identify what we think we should be investing in, to rapidly identify those types of, whether it be NLP models, graph prediction types of models, and rapidly evaluate those, and then invest time in actually scaling them up so they're production ready. But this innovation lifecycle is another key thing that we see as a bit of a challenge, but addressing head on to make sure that we're focusing on the right capabilities for our systems.
Right. Let's switch things up and discuss some of the key successes for the last few years. For instance, we know BAI were able to define Baricitinib as a potential drug candidate for the treatment of COVID quite early in the pandemic. What were the critical prerequisites to enable this?
Yeah, so the focus and work we carried out in the Baricitinib discovery goes back really to when the pandemic kicked off. And again, this is starting in January 2020. And over a very short period of time, it was 48 hours, our research team identified the potential for Baricitinib to be a therapeutic that could be repurposed and act as a treatment within this space. Our thesis there at the time was very much identifying the anti-inflammatory properties of the drug, but also understanding what is the underlying host mechanisms that could be impacted and actually look to prevent viral entry into the cells. And what really allowed this discovery early was having, again, at our fingertips, or our researchers' fingertips, access to our knowledge graph systems, which had a very complete view of biological mechanisms, disease systems, and how these can potentially be perturbed, understood. And ultimately, if there was then a potential therapeutic that could actually elicit these responses. So this is really very, very rapid early stage hypothesis generation enabled by our NLP infrastructure, rapidly running over. And at that time, we were able to actually introduce some additional information into the graph around some of the actual COVID-related entities of interest. The graph itself was then further enhanced with disease processes and mechanism pathways relevant to that particular space. And our scientists were then able really then to explore this and rapidly come up with this hypothesis. Over the course of the time that came, we actually really sort of discovered that it did have a positive impact, and it really sort of sparked sort of global investigation around Baricitinib to treat COVID. And we've seen a steady stream of positive clinical trial results over the last couple of years, where we've actually seen a very big impact in the COVE barrier trial, which showed it reduced deaths by up to 38% in hospitalized COVID-19 patients. And this is one of the largest mortality benefits seen in the pandemic to date. More recently, it was authorized to be given as an emergency of patients, emergency use in hospitalized COVID patients. And again, I think this is really a consequence of having at our hands an initial system that provided a very good understanding and overview of the biological systems, and then rapidly data coming online within the COVID space from the community, from others, and then the very fast moving researchers from around the world really helping to validate and get trials running as rapidly as possible. But COVID is, the positive impact that's had on patients has been sort of fantastic. As our core focus, however, is actually also on developing novel medicines for complex diseases. And again, over the last 5 to 6 years, we've really sort of built out that pipeline, and in excess of 20 programs in a diverse range of disease areas, all initiated with this initial deployment focus using our AI platform. Our most advanced programs to date are in atopic dermatitis, where we have an asset in phase 1 clinical trials. And behind this is our ulcerative colitis, which is currently in IND-enabling studies. We've also established successful strategic collaborations with partners such as AstraZeneca, and where we're working with them to support their target discovery activities, leveraging the processes we've developed at Benevolent to progress their own drug development portfolio. And there we have specific focus in chronic kidney disease and idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And very pleased to say that at the end of last year, we were able to successfully extend the collaboration for another 3 years, covering 2 additional diseases, in heart failure and systemic lupus. So again, it's a combination of being able to rapidly support events that were unexpected, obviously around COVID, and hopefully provide some value to patients, and hopefully sort of therapeutic treatments. But our sort of longer term aims has also been developing our own pipeline successfully, and hopefully having that impact for the patients affected by the diseases covered within our pipeline to date.
Right. Are there some key learnings for BAI from that project in particular you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think one very positive outcome from this project, focusing on the discovery of baricitinib as a therapeutic to help COVID patients, has been the appetite for data producers across the healthcare and life sciences industries to make data readily available. And again, we've benefited from this directly, and we really hope patients will do so as well as a consequence. We really want to promote and endorse this. I think if we were to direct this attention to other disease areas, the impact would just be equally as enormous. And again, this is probably the one sort of learning I'd love to sort of make sure the community is fully aware of. This has, as I said, resulted in an unprecedented pace across the industry of successful R&D activities, and ultimately allowed us and others to better understand the virus, identify interventions, and for others develop vaccines in this particular space. So promoting that access to data has been something to really sort of share back to the community.
Thank you. So just my last question for today would be looking into the future of text and data mining and AI in this space and the pursuit of BAI's mission specifically and the application of these technologies by society in general to address challenges and opportunities. Where do you see the future of text and data mining AI in this space?
So we're looking to reduce the time it takes to deliver novel therapeutic interventions to patients, and ultimately so that we can improve the lives of those people affected by disease. And what this for us practically means is to enable and ensure that our teams have access to the right data at the right time. And this starts at the very beginning. And when we sort of go back to text and data mining, the output from publishers, how this is being rapidly sort of surfaced and delivered to the researchers that can understand this is absolutely key and critical, and has created a foundation of elements of our business. And we're looking to leverage and demonstrated benefit very recently with the Baricitinib work in COVID. So continuing working with publishers like Springer Nature and employing these NLP approaches on top of the content ensures that we have this view that contributes to the knowledge foundation, enabling hypothesis generation and validation. And again, this is something is foundational for us and the industry as a whole. And we'll look forward to doing more of this going forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark, for this interview. It's been really helpful in understanding the space and your contributions, as well as the pioneering work that Benevolent AI is performing.